In Part 3 of the special edition of One American News Investigates, we continue to dismantle the Democrats' impeachment inquiry. Our investigation next takes us thousands of miles to Eastern Europe. There, our search took us from Budapest to Kiev to Vienna. We captured on tape more witnesses, each with a side of the story America should be hearing amidst Democrat impeachment inquiries. For this mission, One American News brought Rudy Giuliani. His hundreds of hours and months of research into what he calls the great political scandal of our time made him the only person to go with us on this trip. What we found will both astound and enrage. Get ready. You're about to hear a side of the story kept from you not only by a complacent media, but by a biased State Department and a Democrat Party desperate to cover its tracks. We have now sunk to a depth at which restatement of the obvious is the first duty of intelligent men. George Orwell. December 2019, Washington, D.C. We find House Speaker Nancy Pelosi reigning over a rambling impeachment inquiry that has spun well out of her gavel's reach. Hers is a party ceaseless in its shrill desire to oust President Donald Trump, whose administration is credited for the lowest unemployment rates in history, the highest stock markets in memory, and a cultural movement bigger than any single political party. For Pelosi and Democrats, 2020 is looking dismal. Theirs is a party lacking inspiration, leadership, and ideas, bogged down by a grungy kaleidoscope of gender-bent radicals, faceless mobs, and Greenpeace fanatics. In their own words,
I'm concerned that if we don't impeach this president, he will get reelected.
With their Russia collusion scheme dead in the hands of Robert Mueller over the summer, the Democrats picked themselves up by the bootstraps. New season, new crime. The crime? It changed by the hour, but seemed to more or less settle on the idea that Trump must be impeached because he withheld aid from Ukraine and asked Ukraine to look into corruption and Joe Biden. Little did they foresee that their evidence was not only inadmissible in a court of law, but that their inquiry would only expose their star candidate, Joe Biden, to actual scrutiny over his dealings in Ukraine. In Part 1, we sat down with President Trump's personal attorney, America's Mayor Rudy Giuliani. We broke down the Schiff and Democrat charges. We asked why Giuliani was involved in Ukraine in the first place, addressed the so-called conspiracy theories, and discussed Schiff's ragtag lineup of second-hand witnesses. In Part 2, we introduced 3 Ukrainian witnesses tracked down and flown into Washington, a top official, a diplomat, and a member of Ukrainian parliament. Each gave first-hand sworn testimony that the Democrat Party colluded with Ukrainian officials to interfere in our 2016 elections. More specifically, the Democrat Party enlisted the help of a foreign government to harm the Republican Party candidate, Donald J. Trump, committing the exact crime Democrats accused President Trump of committing during the Mueller investigation. In concluding Part 2, we learned there were witnesses who claimed to have testimony and evidence directly contradicting the Democrats' one-sided impeachment inquisition.
This is a pattern that's been going on for 2 years. Must have at least 5 or 6 or 7 Ukrainian witnesses who will say that over the course of the last 2 years, they've tried to come to the United States to give us evidence of vast collusion by the Ukrainians to affect Democrats in the 2016 election, and solid evidence of the corruption involved in Biden getting his son in order to protect the Burisma company. There are presently 3 gentlemen who are seeking a visa in Kyiv to come here and to tell us about collusion, about bribery, about the removal of the prosecutor for the purpose of protecting Biden's son, Zlochevsky, Burisma, all of these very important matters. None of them have ever been accused of corruption. None of them have been convicted of corruption. And they're all being held up.
For the Democrat impeachment charge against President Trump to hold water, 2 things had to be true for them. 1, Joe Biden and his son Hunter had to have committed no wrongdoing in Ukraine. Otherwise, any investigation by any law enforcer in America would prove to have been a duty. So far in this series, we found multiple crimes in Ukraine the Bidens have committed: extortion, bribery, and money laundering. We also heard compelling evidence indicating the DNC and Ukrainian officials, through Alexandra Chalupa, colluded in 2016 to interfere with elections and conspired to violate U.S. laws. And Giuliani says the best evidence against the Bidens is Joe Biden's own words.
If the prosecutor's not fired, you're not getting the money. Oh, son of a got fired.
Probably prosecuted 20 bribery cases. I know the elements cold. I remember judges charging juries. These are the elements of the crime of bribery. I don't think I'd ever seen as concise and as tight and as clear a confession. But worse than that, I saw a confession with proof of guilty knowledge by leaving his son out. We prove intent by lying, lies of omission, lies of commission, because we can't look in somebody's brain. So what we have is we got the clear crime of bribery. He offered a $1 billion loan guarantee in return to fire a prosecutor. Crime of bribery, that's it, over, already.
While all this is admissible in a court of law, more admissible than anything Schiff has presented so far, there's even stronger testimony to be found. To verify Giuliani's claims, we needed to ask these witnesses ourselves whether the documents they presented to us were legitimate, to verify these documents came from Ukrainian officials. We would go to them, and by our side would be none other than Rudy Giuliani and his brimming briefcase containing hundreds of files pertaining to Biden money laundering and Democrat collusion. And if the State Department were truly keeping these witnesses from coming to the U.S. to testify, as the witnesses claim, all the more reason for us to find them. If Schiff would not let their voices be heard, One America would. Ground zero witness for Joe Biden's alleged crime of extortion and bribery? A man named Victor Shokin. Victor Shokin is the prosecutor general Biden boasts about firing.
If the prosecutor's not fired, you're not getting the money.
This is bribery at the highest level of government. A vice president of the United States bribing the president of a country to force the president of the country to do what he doesn't want to do. And now Joe will tell us, oh, it wasn't corrupt because I didn't know about my son. I have 10 ways to prove to you he knew about his son, and only one thing would prove it to you: logic. Logic.
Giuliani says Shokin's testimony is Exhibit A, proving President Trump was duty-bound to ask Ukraine to look into Biden and Democrat criminality. I asked Giuliani about how each witness has been and will be attacked for their credibility.
You can question their credibility, but you can't question that there's evidence. So Mr. Shokin will testify in much more detail than this, but basically, Mr. Shokin is the prosecutor who was fired. Yes, this whole question, well, was he investigating Biden's son? He will testify that he was investigating Biden's son. He will show you the documents that prove he was investigating Biden's son. He will show you documents proving that Biden's son committed the crime of money laundering to the tune of $3 million. And he will testify to a number of incidents where President Poroshenko came into his office and told him to slow down on Burisma and Biden because Vice President Biden was objecting.
We tracked Shokin down and established a safe house, a secured compound to shield us from media and other security threats for a time. Shokin shared details you haven't heard anywhere else. Stay right here, we'll be right back. Former Ukrainian Prosecutor General Viktor Shokin agreed to appear on camera after much negotiation. His mobility was limited. Shokin was undergoing treatment for mercury poisoning. A toxic level of mercury in the human body is 2.0. Medical reports from an Austrian hospital show Shokin's blood results came in at 9.7. He died twice and had to be resuscitated. It is the opinion of his medical doctors that this was not an accidentally consumed level of mercury. Still undergoing intensive treatment, Shokin could not leave the country on top of his visa problems. So Mayor Rudy Giuliani by our side, with his nearly 2 years of investigations into Ukraine, we packed everything up and flew to Ukraine's capital, Kyiv. This would be a significant trip, not only for us, but for Giuliani also. Democrats portrayed Giuliani as slinking about in Ukraine, collecting dirt on Biden for 2020, when the reality was quite different.
Would it surprise you that I haven't been in Ukraine for 2 years? During the course of this entire thing, I never went to the Ukraine, either in the daytime or in the middle of the night.
And Giuliani's research then was for his client, the president, to defend him against the Mueller investigation, not in preparation for 2020. Now, at the prospect of meeting Shokin and other witnesses face to face, the mayor decided to break his streak of Ukrainian absence. We landed in Kyiv, and America's mayor stepped foot in Ukraine for the first time in 2 years. We passed through the Kyiv airport with our camera equipment, the mayor's entourage, and a security detail, and we were taken in separate vehicles to an undisclosed compound secured just beyond the city. As I prepared to meet with Shokin, I refreshed my own understanding of this man. Shokin was appointed Prosecutor General in February 2015, succeeding a long line of short-lived prosecutors. Shokin lasted just over 1 year and resigned in spring of 2016. Mainstream media, in choir-like harmony with Joe Biden and other American-owned news outlets in Ukraine, chant repeatedly how Biden was justified in firing Shokin because he was inept and corrupt, even posting pictures of what appear to be protesters against Shokin. Media cites so-called anti-corruption groups in Ukraine, groups that themselves have corruption charges against them. This is where Ukraine's tangled web of non-government organizations and dark money transmogrify into a self-licking ice cream cone. Group A says Group B is good, and Group B says Group A is good. Slap an upstanding-sounding anti-corruption title to it, and presto, a mutual protection racket is born. Bottom line is, few groups and individuals can be trusted out here. In Ukraine, verify everything and check it twice. We have Mayor Rudy Giuliani, personal attorney to the president, and former Prosecutor General of Ukraine, Viktor Shokin, here in Kyiv, Ukraine, meeting for the very first time in person. And we have a lot of questions for Mr. Shokin. We'd love to ask them of you. So thank you for joining us at One American News. Take us back to your career as a prosecutor and how you got into that office and your time there. Take us back to the first time you were appointed to that office. My first obligation was to reform the prosecutor's office, to fight corruption, not just within Ukraine, but within the office itself. We had a number of hot cases. One of them was Burisma. The first half a year, we were doing great, communicating, investigating, coordinating with allies. Shokin says even relations with then Ambassador Pyatt was off to a good start. But at some point, something happened, something changed. The problem began when we started to dig into Burisma. Did Ambassador Pyatt confront you directly about Burisma? Shokin says Ambassador Pyatt's pressure on him was indirect, but clear. They went from meeting multiple times a week to not at all. Pyatt even delivered a speech criticizing Shokin's handling of Burisma. For me, says Shokin, it was interesting why an ambassador of a foreign nation was trying to interfere in the investigation of a sovereign country. The Burisma investigation consisted of 3 charges: money laundering, tax evasion, and illegal enrichment for its founder, Mykola Zlochevsky. Shokin says pressure to stop investigating Hunter Biden's Burisma activities then increased, and President Poroshenko personally asked Shokin to wind down the Burisma investigation to appease then Vice President and Obama's Ukraine point man, Joe Biden. As the months passed, more cases and investigations into Burisma sprung up, and President Poroshenko came to Shokin's office and told Shokin the Burisma case was why Joe Biden wouldn't release $1 billion in U.S. loan guarantees, money Ukraine needed desperately. Yes, said Shokin, that's what he told me. He came to me and said, "You are a patriot of Ukraine. We need this $1 billion. We're at war, and if you are a patriot, you will close this case." My conversation with Poroshenko on this, Shokin says, was in a phone call. It was after we started seizing Burisma assets in Ukraine when Poroshenko called me and said, "Listen, this all has to stop already. Joe Biden's temper is overflowing. This seizing of Burisma assets," said Poroshenko, was the last straw. Shokin says Poroshenko then paid him a visit in his office, asking for Shokin's resignation. Shokin responded and asked, "Why do I have to go? I haven't done anything wrong. I'm doing my job. This is standard procedure. We have reason to freeze Burisma assets." And Poroshenko said, "Biden is angry about you freezing Burisma assets. I'll figure something out." We asked Shokin if this demand for a resignation was specifically because Biden had asked for it, or if there were other possible reasons. Shokin insists it was all Biden. Because of Biden, says Shokin. Everyone knew what was going on. Poroshenko told me directly that I had to step down as prosecutor general because of Joe Biden. Biden and leftist media claim Shokin was corrupt and inept and had to be dismissed, despite the fact that not a single charge of corruption has ever been raised or proven against Shokin to date. To this, Shokin shrugs. Shokin says people don't have to believe him. Just look at the transcripts. Biden's transcripts, that is. The transcripts of Biden's telephone conversations with Poroshenko, says Shokin, is where the truth will show itself. Americans must demand it. And if they do, they will see, broad as day, Joe Biden was illegally influencing foreign officials in order to protect his son, Hunter, and shield illegal money laundering activities.
Be very interesting to see the transcripts. We've got numerous phone calls from the vice president to Poroshenko. Poroshenko showing up in Shokin's office and saying, "Biden's putting pressure on me. You can't go forward with Burisma. Can you slow it down?" And all of a sudden, Shokin gets this communique from Latvia that shows a $16 million laundering transaction, classic laundering transaction. It goes from Ukraine to Latvia. It's disguised as a loan to another company, Wire Logic, I believe. It then goes to Cyprus, gets disguised as another loan. This is called Digitech. And then it's dispersed as payment of board fees. Now, you don't make two loans to pay board fees unless you're laundering the money. $3 million gets to Hunter Biden that way. That is a straight-out violation of a money laundering statute.
The document referred here is an official letter dated February 2016 from the Prosecutor's Office of the Republic of Latvia, Money Laundering Investigations Division. The letter states, quote, "According to publicly available information, Burisma Holding Limited and its director Hunter Biden are involved in a corruption affair," end quote. Latvia traced $14.7 million between 2012 and 2015. The funds were transferred back to Burisma to the accounts of Devon Archer and Hunter Biden. One America asked Shokin if he recognized the document. He said he did, and that there were more such inquiries that made it impossible for him to justify simply shutting down the Burisma cases. One American News also verified on camera what Shokin had stated in a stunning 12-page sworn affidavit to an Austrian court. Quote, "President Poroshenko asked me to resign due to pressure from the U.S. presidential administration, in particular from Joe Biden, who was the U.S. vice president. Biden was threatening to withhold $1 billion in U.S. subsidies to Ukraine until I was removed from office." Shokin goes on, quote, "I was forced out because I was leading a wide-ranging corruption probe into Burisma. Joe Biden's son was on the board of directors. I refused to close this investigation. Therefore, I was forced to leave under direct and intense pressure from Joe Biden and the U.S. administration."
Remember, Mr. Shokin, we don't just have to rely on you. Mr. Biden confessed to this. Mr. Biden stood up, I think it was on January 23, 2018, in front of the Council on Foreign Relations, and he said, "I told Poroshenko that he had 6 hours to fire that son of a," that's you, "or he's not going to get his $1 billion. So in America, we call that a confession.
Of course, if this case were tried in a European Court of Human Rights, this would be an open-shut case. Joe Biden broke Ukrainian law. Article 343 of the Ukrainian Criminal Code covers intervention in the activities of law enforcement officers using coercion, blackmail, threats, and intervention against prosecutors.
Let's go back to the question that Chanel asked before, which is, so you're a lawyer, I'm a lawyer, there's a universal definition of bribery. The universal definition of bribery is that it's a crime to offer something of value in return for official action.
Yes.
As a lawyer, is it clear to you that's what happened here with Biden?
Значит, смотрите, у меня есть заключение.
Of course. I also have an expert legal opinion from Ukrainian parliament stating what Biden did in Ukraine was internal interference in the Ukrainian political system, which is a crime. This testimony directly contradicts proclamations that Biden's committed no wrong.
He did not do a single thing wrong, as everybody's investigated.
Right. Well, he's making up the allegations against the vice president.
Clearly, someone is lying. It seems releasing a transcript of these phone calls between Biden and Poroshenko around the time Shokin was dismissed should clarify much.
So Senator Lindsey Graham has subpoenaed a number of telephone calls and records that basically show that this campaign to get rid of Shokin goes back to at least December 7, 2015. There's a phone call on the logs of the State Department that says the vice president calls Poroshenko, and according to the leak, so I can't be sure, it says to dismiss Shokin. So this is one of the FOIA requests that was made by John Solomon that the Justice Department, the State Department is resisting. But now Senator Graham has subpoenaed it and said to Mike Pompeo, why are you holding this up? I mean, if it doesn't say it, we should know it. But there's definitely a phone call between Biden and Poroshenko on December 7th. 2 days later, Biden's son and his partner, Devin Archer, later convicted of insider trading, meet at the State Department concerning Burisma.
That meeting was with a man named Tony Blinken, the number 2 at the State Department. Only transcripts and real whistleblowers will be able to shed light on what all this was about. Next, we found the man who replaced Shokin as Prosecutor General, a controversial figure reported to have been handpicked by Biden himself. But even so, the case on Burisma only gets worse. Don't go anywhere. You're watching an exclusive One American News Investigates. We'll be right back. Following the resignation of Ukrainian Prosecutor General Viktor Shokin in 2016, the country was in need of a new Prosecutor General. It was around this time, Giuliani informs us, that Biden was calling President Poroshenko again. The transcripts of these phone conversations, Giuliani says, will also be very revealing as to whether Biden had a hand in choosing Shokin's replacement. Following the resignation of Ukrainian Prosecutor General Viktor Shokin in 2016, the country was in need of a new Prosecutor General. It was around this time, Giuliani informs us, that Biden was calling President Poroshenko again. The transcripts of these phone conversations, Giuliani says, will also be very revealing as to whether Biden had a hand in choosing Shokin's replacement. 2 months after Shokin left his post, a new Prosecutor General was appointed. Yuri Lutsenko, an engineer by training who had gained patriotic notoriety for being thrown in prison for 2 years for his outspoken criticism of Russia. Lutsenko fought on the Eastern Front with his wife and sons, beating back Russian tanks in defense of Ukrainian sovereignty. A hero in certain Ukrainian circles, Lutsenko inherits the highest legal office in the land. One problem: Lutsenko has 0 legal training. To this appointment, Joe Biden expressed approval.
Got fired. And they put in place someone who was solid.
Lutsenko was least willing to talk to us initially. but we needed to get him on record. He was willing to meet with us. We made our way to a secured lodge in the woods beyond the Capitol, surrounded by security. Remember, Rudy Giuliani has been conducting these interviews and has been collecting these documents since November 2018. This will be the first time he will have met many of these witnesses face to face. I discussed with Giuliani first what he expected out of our next witness. Lutsenko said Giuliani would be able to demonstrate a clear line between our U.S. embassy and interference in the Ukrainian Prosecutor General's office. Interference that came by way of forcing them to open or close certain cases, like, say, Burisma. That our U.S. embassy in Kiev was so influential in Ukraine's internal affairs raises even more alarms if it is shown that the embassy was clearly rooting for one candidate of one political party in a presidential election. Lutsenko had recently stirred up delight amongst the left for seemingly having turned on Giuliani. Lutsenko has a mixed reputation. He at first seemed to back up everything that Giuliani was arguing about Biden money laundering activity through Burisma. Then, Lutsenko seemed to have suddenly changed course and said he didn't think the Bidens committed a crime. Lutsenko clarified. The media had chopped his statement in half, he says. His full statement back then was that he didn't think the Bidens committed a crime in Ukraine, but that they likely committed a crime in the U.S.
I gave 16 interviews to American serious newspapers and TV, and only one.
Out of how many? One out of how many?
One from 16.
One out of?
One newspaper, only one, from 16 media, printed my answer, my full answer.
That crime, his office found, was money laundering at a massive scale.
So, Mr. Lutsenko, you inherited Mr. Shokin's Prosecutor General office, and describe for us your first interaction with the U.S. Embassy in this position.
So everything was good, but then Yovanovitch visited me.
Ambassador Yovanovitch.
Ambassador Yovanovitch and Mr. Kent, they visited me for small negotiation or talkings.
Did they visit you in your office? Just curious.
Yes. Firstly, I visited her in her office, and then it was the second meeting, but the first in my office. They visited me. And we spoke normally, and she asked me to change some old deputies.
Ambassador Yovanovitch asked you?
Not asked, but maybe she advised me to change your deputies, because they are from old team and they are not very effective.
For context, Ambassador Yovanovitch was brought before America by Adam Schiff and used in the impeachment inquiry as one of his star witnesses, and with a classical Schiff indignance, introduced as
Ambassador Yovanovitch was an anti-corruption champion.
Schiff painted Yovanovitch the poor, heroic woman whose reputation as a lifelong civil servant was maligned by the likes of Rudy Giuliani and the Trump administration, who, in Adam Schiff's script, were villains milling around in Ukraine to dig up dirt on their equally innocent Joe Biden. For Schiff, Yovanovitch's testimony would prove how President Trump sent people on the ground to spread conspiracy theories and smear campaigns against upstanding citizens like Yovanovitch in order to cheat America out of the next election. But Yovanovitch's reputation is not all Schiff makes it out to be. Multiple Ukrainian sources said that Yovanovitch's embassy was colloquially dubbed the Clinton campaign headquarters, with many even receiving invites to a big Hillary Clinton victory party planned at Yovanovitch's house. Lutsenko says the ambassador was doing the Democrat Party's bidding nearly from the day he started in the prosecutor's office, and he realized this on her second visit with George Kent sitting beside her.
She asked me to close it, but I said, it is impossible, we have investigation process and Mr. Investigator. So I took a piece of paper on my table and I write these three, not cases, but synonyms. Kasko, Leshchenko, Shabunin. Okay, Miss Ambassador, Madam Ambassador. Let's continue your untouchable list. She asked me, why are you so serious? And then I destroyed this list. So while I am general prosecutor, no president nor ambassador could give me or could announce me such lists. That was the full story.
Incidentally, this list of so-called untouchables were of names involved in an agency called NABU, the National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine. This will later prove to be a bombshell detail.
She ran immediately from the office, and my boy near office doors asked me, "What you told her?" His red face and very angry. I didn't agree to receive any orders to open or to close criminal cases.
Fast forward to Adam Schiff's impeachment inquiry, and Schiff called up Ambassador Yovanovitch to testify. Lutsenko says he was shocked to watch Yovanovitch's testimony when she said she never gave him such a list.
The allegation that I disseminated a do not prosecute list was a fabrication. Mr. Lutsenko, the former Ukrainian prosecutor general who made that allegation, has acknowledged that the list never existed.
Technically, says Lutsenko, no, she never gave him a list. The list still came from her.
And our interpreter made a small mistake. He said, in Ukrainian, вона озвучила, she announced me surnames. But my interpreter said he, as far as I remember, gave me a list. So announced and to give, certainly it is the difference. And Yovanovitch and Kent now used this mistake of interpreter to speak that there was no such story. Yes, there was no list, but there was announced of 3 surnames.
This little episode merely demonstrates that Schiff's star witness is perhaps not as truthful as he would need us to believe. But worse, that she was actively, personally involved in investigations at the Prosecutor General's office. An unusual and unethical scenario, to say the least. But following Lutsenko's side of the story, it gets worse. When Lutsenko found a case in which $7 billion went to the US via possible money laundering to a firm called Franklin Templeton, he wanted help from the Justice Department to track down and retrieve this money. Considering how interested Yovanovitch was in the status of certain cases at the Prosecutor General's office, Lutsenko thought Yovanovitch would be helpful. She wasn't. In fact, she played the bureaucratic dunce.
I was once again shocked when Madame Yovanovitch told to members of the committee that Lutsenko asked me to organize his meeting with American Attorney General. But you know, gentlemen, that there is a procedure for this, she told. The procedure that Lutsenko should, or even must give us an short topic, what points he wants to discuss with American law enforcement bodies. And Yovanovitch said, and he never gave us such an information. I have bad news for Madame Yovanovitch. This is my letter, my deputy letter, to request for cooperation in investigation against the criminal organization of Yanukovych and regarding possible investment in the US-based mutual and other funds for the purpose of money laundering. Dear Legal Attaché, Office of the Legal Attaché, US Embassy.
When is this dated?
The October of 2017. The October of 2017. Here is stamps, signature, everything.
And she claimed before Congress that she never received a topic.
Under oath, she declared in the Congress that I never sent any information. This is official letter.
Here, we accomplished a major task in our investigation. We verified that this incriminating official letter from the prosecutor's office was authentic and came from Lutsenko's office. And Lutsenko confirms incontrovertible authenticity, but proves also Yovanovitch's deceit.
And Yovanovitch blocked me. She never answered me after this request, and she lied in Congress. This is the evidence. I am happy that I have this document, because how I could explain to American public that I am right? This is this document, with signature, with stamps, with everything.
It all made sense, says Lutsenko, when he realized that Adam Schiff himself invested in Franklin Templeton. Once again, it is fair to continue to question the credibility of each of these witnesses, but stripped down to the dates and the facts, a jury can ostensibly ignore Lutsenko and look upon this letter of record to Yovanovitch's embassy alone to prove that one of Adam Schiff's star witnesses, Marie Yovanovitch, lied before Congress in America. She seems to have been trying to help protect a system of greed and enrichment enjoyed by top state and Democrat Party officials. Next, we go back to Kiev, where we uncover a devastating pile of smoking guns. We'll be right back. So beyond the word of Viktor Shokin, the prosecutor general who has reason enough to begrudge Joe Biden for having him fired, we just heard testimony from Shokin's successor, another equally controversial but compelling witness, Mr. Lutsenko. Lutsenko and Shokin, two of Ukraine's prosecutors general, serve as first-hand witnesses and provided documentary evidence showing what appears to have been a concerted effort between the U.S. State Department, the vice president, and the Ukrainian government to meddle in Ukrainian criminal cases. We also found that Biden likely violated Section 343 of the Ukrainian Criminal Code in his interfering role in pressuring Ukraine to have Viktor Shokin removed from office.
Earlier, Giuliani reminded us this mess started off with his looking into Democrat collusion and election interference back in the Mueller days. But in the process, the Biden's names came up over and again, long before Biden announced his presidential dreams. Evidence persistently cropped up showing how Joe Biden was pulling strings in the Ukrainian prosecutor's office while it was investigating his own son's company. And the U.S. Embassy was telling the prosecutor which cases and deputies to dismiss. The story gets worse. Opportunity means motive, the three indicators justifying an investigation into a crime. For Biden, the opportunity was Obama making him point man for Ukraine. The means was the power of the vice presidency to wield $1 billion in U.S. aid to get Ukrainians to do whatever Biden wanted, a power he exercised by his own admission. The motive was to protect his son Hunter from investigation. Enter Andrei Derkach. 7 times elected to the Ukrainian parliament, Derkach sits on the budget committee and has become renowned in Ukraine for his dogged opposition to an agency called NABU, the Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine. NABU's court system has investigatory powers that some argue wrongfully overrides the Ukrainian prosecutor general's office. NABU's structure was written by none other than Yovanovitch's sidekick, George Kent, another Adam Schiff witness from America's compromised State Department. This was Derkach and Giuliani's first meeting face-to-face. Giuliani first heard of Derkach in October 2019. Derkach gave a press conference laying out information gathered from investigative journalists and government files that confirmed Burisma's money laundering, Hunter and Joe Biden's direct involvement, and interference in the 2016 elections. This press conference was quickly ignored and buried by most of the press. Derkach put all his findings on a website called NABU Leaks. But because Derkach was an active member of Ukrainian parliament, before we began, Giuliani wanted to make clear his role in speaking to Derkach.
This interview is being conducted by OAN, an American network, journalistic organization that's dedicated to bringing out the truth. And my role, you should understand, I don't represent the government. I am President Trump's private attorney. So my role throughout, going back over a year before I met you, I wish I had met you earlier, is to try to get the facts about Ukrainian collusion, Ukrainian corruption that interfered in the 2016 election, because the Democrats spent so much time falsely accusing the president of participating with Russians. That turned out to be false. I believe it was false and manufactured. And my goal here is just one simple goal, and that is to defend the President of the United States individually against the original false charges of Russian collusion and now the false charges with regard to his conversation with President Zelensky, which was not only an appropriate conversation, but I hope that we're going to be able to show it was a required conversation.
To this, Derkach also established his motive for producing the evidence showing corruption in the 2016 elections and the Biden's money laundering activity. Derkach said the evidence he had proving the Bidens were stealing from Ukrainian taxpayers, U.S. taxpayers, and committing crimes to cover up their tracks could fill volumes stacked to the ceiling. And what was Derkach's motive? To recover stolen Ukrainian tax dollars to the Ukrainian treasury and restore U.S.-Ukrainian trust. For the time that we had, Mr. Derkach offered us a hefty folder. The evidence within, he said, clearly demonstrated how the embassy, the State Department, and Joe Biden were all trying to cover up one thing: money laundering on a massive scale. We'll be right back. Derkach started a website called NabuLeaks.com. There he compiled the documents and evidence that have been leaked to him by groups of Ukrainian investigative journalists who, fearing for their lives, were unwilling to publish under their own names in a country known to dispense poisoning, beheadings, and assassins. We start by following the money. What Derkach presented us was astounding. New evidence. A year and a half worth of Morgan Stanley bank statements mapping out the cash flow of Devon Archer's Rosemont Seneca company. Archer was Hunter Biden's business partner and fellow Burisma board member. Rosemont Seneca was the shell company at the heart of an enormous money laundering operation, says Derkach. Over 300 pages of bank statements were given to One American News and to Mr. Giuliani for review. Derkach notes, in this time period, large payments were made to Robert Hunter Biden, or just Robert Biden. The reasons for these large payments were unclear. Combine these bank statements with the Latvian government investigation, and the Prosecutor General's office, just 4 weeks before our sit-down with Derkach, issued an official indictment against Burisma founder Nikolai Zlochevsky. In a November 2019 press conference, it was announced that the Prosecutor General's office found, quote, the son of Vice President Joe Biden receiving payment for his services with money raised through criminal means and money laundering. Money coming not from successful company operations, but from money stolen from Ukraine. Money to Burisma board members for no stated reason to the tune of $16.5 million. This was the case opened under Prosecutor General Viktor Shokin's watch, the case over which he was allegedly dismissed. This is where George Kent's increasingly nefarious-seeming Anti-Corruption Bureau gets involved again. Let's go back to when Shokin received what must have been parts, if not all, of these bank statements and the request from Latvia. For brevity, here is a very simplified summation of what happened next. Shokin writes a letter. Dear Mr. Sitnik, head of the Anti-Corruption Bureau, please conduct a trial on the Burisma case. Mr. Sitnik responds, Dear Mr. Shokin, having reviewed your request, we do not know what you are talking about. Please jump through these bureaucratic hoops. Shokin responds, Mr. Sitnik, we don't have time. The statute of limitations is about to expire. Please help. Derkach then shows us how immediately after Shokin sends these requests to NABU, the first deputy of NABU has his assistant leak Shokin's Burisma requests to the U.S. Embassy. Polina Sig sends this email, among others, to State Department employee Hena Yemelyanova. Unusual, right? It gets even more curious. Instead of investigating Burisma, as Shokin asked, the Anti-Corruption Bureau starts quietly investigating Viktor Shokin and Shokin's family. Derkach showed us leaked transmissions of very private information, full dossiers on Shokin and his family that were sent from the Anti-Corruption Bureau to the U.S. Embassy. The timing of this, you ask? 2 weeks before Joe Biden visits Kiev with the possibility of America's $1 billion in loan guarantees. 8 weeks later, Shokin is asked to resign. This is what we know. There are many more documents that seem to back up and add to this story. Currently, OAN is sorting through hundreds of text messages allegedly sent between Anti-Corruption Bureau officials and the U.S. Embassy regarding Burisma. Too much to cram into a single segment on TV. Intriguing questions arise as we pore over these leaked emails and documents and sequences of events. NABU's stated mission is to combat corruption. The reality, says Derkach, is that it serves as a shelter to hide and protect corruption.
Who controls NABU?
The U.S. Embassy.
The U.S. Embassy controls your law enforcement bureau?
It's all in the documents.
And their results on corruption have been, I was told by one witness, pretty close to zero.
Yes. Remember, it was members of NABU that Ambassador Yovanovitch allegedly put on a do not prosecute list, according to Prosecutor General Yuri Lutsenko.
And the ambassador at the time was Ambassador Yovanovitch, who testified recently that she was very, very strongly anti-corruption.
When talking about corruption or anti-corruption, you have to talk about results, says Derkach. When Ambassador Yovanovitch sat in Congress and was referred to as a champion of anti-corruption, half of Ukraine was laughing. Corruption got worse under Yovanovitch in the Poroshenko presidency. Much worse, and even more money was stolen from our treasury. Yovanovitch's embassy and its close connection with NABU is also revelatory, says Derkach.
So NABU, which was established by George Kent and the Soros organization to fight corruption, turns out to be corrupt itself. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, Derkach says. NABU was trying to make money.
And many people know that, right? Many Ukrainians have told me that.
In politics, everybody knows this. NABU is dirty. Derkach doesn't just say this. We sat with him for over 3 hours, learning about the cases that were closed or opened at the will of the U.S. Embassy, looking at case rulings that found billions of U.S. dollars were being siphoned off into an endless series of NGOs tightly controlled by the U.S. Embassy. We asked about Burisma.
So you found 6 criminal cases, proceedings related to Burisma, and immediately when you announced that you were looking into these 6 cases, you are saying that 2 of them were closed?
More than 2. 11 total cases related to Burisma have now been closed. We just got a new prosecutor general. On the second day of his job, he closed one of the Burisma cases immediately.
Joe Biden and Hunter Biden pop up. Tell us how their names are involved in these criminal cases you were looking into. How is Joe Biden and Hunter Biden's name involved?
Derkach goes at length talking about the political context in which Burisma was operating, evading taxes and giving away illegal licenses to certain individuals. At the end of it, Ukrainian tax dollars were stolen and money laundered through Burisma. Prosecutors presented before Ukrainian parliament an official indictment showing a clear trail of money laundering going through Burisma and to Hunter Biden. Derkach also mentions how it has been leaked from the prosecutor's office that an open case currently is looking into $900,000 found paid to Joe Biden from Ukraine for, quote, consulting services. But the case is reportedly still ongoing, and we don't yet have access to this document. Just days after the Burisma announcement, the prosecutor was fired. Clearly, Burisma is still being protected. Derkach had much to show, yet in speaking, he was notably careful to ensure that everything he said he backed up with evidence. But by interview's end, we realized this story was far from over. The documents we have shown you are but a small fraction of what was given to us, but they seem to add explosive context to a devastating portrait of power, greed, cover-ups, and political arrogance. Derkach says he has sent countless official requests for help from the United States. His efforts were met with radio silence. Until now. Stay here, we'll be right back. Democrat impeachment, led by failed and frustrated screenwriter turned Hollywood congressman Adam Schiff, has turned into a full-blown and public investigation of an international scandal involving not Donald J. Trump, but the Bidens, the Democratic Party, and our U.S. State Department. OAN has led the charge in this with Rudy Giuliani, and we will continue to do so. In the meantime, it is notable, Shokin, Lutsenko, Derkach, these men are turning out to be actual whistleblowers. A jury can scrutinize their reputations and question their first-hand testimonies, but ultimately, the official documents they present speak for themselves. And as whistleblowers, these men, along with our previous 3 witnesses, possess the courage to show their faces, show their names, to come out of the shadows to testify under oath, and to do so again before a fair hearing, if only their visas would allow it. These men are risking their lives, livelihoods, and their families to come forward and whistleblow on corruption and money laundering stolen from their homeland's coffers. This is their stated motive for coming forward. They are asking for America's help, for our justice system to cooperate in joint Ukraine investigations to recover their stolen money. Giuliani says he hopes these findings will inspire action, but first it requires digging up the evidence as we have done and getting these whistleblowers' voices and testimonies heard.
First of all, I have to say that Chanel has performed a real public service in getting this information out. Something like this should have been done by our FBI 2 years ago, or our Justice Department. And as someone who served 17 years in the Justice Department, I'm embarrassed that it hasn't been. And I'm embarrassed that you had to deal with a Justice Department that turned your people away because they wouldn't hear equal wrongdoing by Democrats, that they were more than anxious not only to hear about Republicans, but in some cases to create and elaborate. So I thank you for allowing this forum.
Each of our 6 witnesses brought with them evidence admissible in a court of law. Their powerful testimonies shed light on a side of the story Adam Schiff's one-sided impeachment not only omitted, but the media has concealed, covered up, ignored, or wrongfully discredited, discrediting the truth in order to manufacture an impeachment hoax that amounts to a coup. History will note their complicity. Some will call it treason. Worse than media's complicity is the state of our own law enforcement. Where is our FBI in all of this? After 2016, the FBI had a choice: go after DNC corruption or target innocent people to indulge the FBI's personal hatred for President Trump. On the outside, it appears the FBI has chosen the latter. Chalupa, the Bidens, Devon Archer, the DNC, and others have left not breadcrumbs leading to bribery, money laundering, and collusion, but floodlights blasting a sheer disregard for the law and for the witnesses prepared to testify. Who will act? And what about our State Department? If investigations are opened, will our State Department hand over the transcripts between Joe Biden and Poroshenko? Will the State Department cooperate with an investigation into the actions of their employees in Ukraine?
Our State Department should start operating for us and not to protect some of the people in there who may have done something wrong. For you to do this, I know takes a lot of courage.
Courage coming from real whistleblowers. Whistleblowers not huddling in Adam Schiff's basement or behind vainglorious attorneys. No, the real whistleblowers are the Ukrainian whistleblowers blowing the whistle on real crimes that likely took place on Ukrainian and American soil in an astounding political scandal. Not only do their evidence and testimony justify President Trump in asking Ukraine about corruption, these crimes remind us it is the president's duty to ensure that our political offices are never used to bribe, corrupt, or steal from foreign nations, regardless of whether a drug addict son is at risk of being exposed for his greed. We are all out of time for part 3, but stay tuned. OAN is currently poring over the rest of this material offered to us by Durkash and others, and Giuliani is, as of this broadcast, compiling and presenting his own report to the president and to Congress based on what we have found. OAN will await the White House's review of these exhibits before making public the rest of these findings. Since launching this exclusive OAN Investigates series, the dam is breaking. More witnesses are coming forward willing to testify, present documents, and swear under oath about DNC corruption, Biden money laundering, and State Department collusion. They want to testify, and if Adam Schiff or our State Department won't let them, then to testify straight to the American people through our cameras. This OAN investigation does not end here. It's only just beginning, and justice will be served. I'm Chanel Rion in Washington. Thank you for watching.